Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Assembly Judiciary. Welcome back on this bright Monday morning. Welcome to those of you here in Carson City, as well as anyone that's watching online or that will be present there in Grant Sawyer. With that, Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, Assemblywoman Cohen, Assemblywoman Considine, Assemblywoman Gallant, Assemblyman Gray, Assemblywoman Hanson, Assemblywoman Hardy, Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch, Assemblywoman Marzola, Assemblywoman Mosca, Assemblywoman Newby, Assemblyman Ortlicker, Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, Assemblyman Urick, Chair Miller.
Here. And with that, just a few reminders, or I should say, please mark, please mark Vice Chair Marzola. If she joins us, she's presenting in another committee right now, her own bills. And then please mark Assemblywoman Newby. I think we're going to end up being absent excused. And the same with Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. And so with that, our presenter for both bills is actually tied up in her committee right now, and they're about to vote. So we are going to just sort of pause for the next few minutes. Or actually, we'll go into, let's do a 10-minute recess. Everyone is allowed to speak out loud. Okay, we will come back to order. A few other reminders that I forgot to mention as I heard my laptop buzzing off. Please make sure you turn off your electric devices so that there's no disruption during the hearings. Also, we will have a public comment section at the end of today's hearing. Today we have two bills scheduled, and we're actually going to take the agenda out of order. We will start with Senate Bill 243. Senate Bill 243 is presented by Senator Wynn and revises provisions relating to catalytic converters. So, Senator, your hearing is open. I now see that it looks like you're having co-presenters. So please introduce your co-presenters and then proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, and I apologize for my tardiness. I was stuck in a joint Senate Ways and our Senate Finance and Assembly Ways Committee meeting. So I am fashionably late, although we are fashionable today, right? With our Nevada tartan. My name is Rochelle Wynn. I proudly represent Senate District 3, and today with me today I have Detective Christopher Reese from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, as well as Savon Louie. As many of you know, I think it's always important that our bills and our things solve problems in our community and in our state. And I like to incorporate the people that bring the problems and solutions to me, and that's why I have Detective Reese here. And I think on this day, this AANHPI Lobby Day, that it's always important to bring in the next generation of advocates to be a part of this political process. So we have sophomore Savon Louie here, and I'm going to let her begin the presentation.
Should definitely turn that on. So my name is Savon Louie, and I am pleased to come before you today to present Senate Bill 243, alongside Senator Rochelle Wynn and Detective Reese from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. So we are here today to help curb what is increasingly becoming a serious and expensive crime, catalytic converter theft. So before I go over the bill, I think it's important to go under some brief context to understand why this is so important and why we need legislation here in our status quo. So according to Carfax, last year in the US, there were as many as 153,000 catalytic converters stolen. So in the case that you may not know what a catalytic converter is, so what it essentially is, so if we think about our automobiles and we think about the exhaust, so what it essentially does, a catalytic converter essentially converts the amount of emissions that are coming out of our exhaust, so things like carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide, it translates that into things like water vapor. So it makes the emissions significantly less potent, and it reduces the impact of those emissions that are emitted. Next, these parts are being stolen because they contain rare metals that are used in a whole host of products. So they're made out of metals like platinum and palladium, which are in such high demand. So so these metals are extremely expensive to produce and are in such limited supply, which makes stealing these catalytic converters so lucrative. So catalytic converters are also relatively easy to steal, and because they're so exposed under a vehicle, they can be removed really quickly. And we have seen that these catalytic converters can be removed in minutes. State Farm states that the largest automobile insurer in the country reported that between July 2021 and June 2022, catalytic converter thefts rose nationally by 109%, and in our status quo, it is at 400%, which impacts not only those who are direct victims of these thefts, but also anyone who owns a car and is impacted by car insurance, but as well as the pollutants that are then emitted into our environment because these cars don't have catalytic converters anymore. So I will now turn this over to Detective Reese to talk more about the local impacts and what this looks like in our own valley, and then Senator Wynn will walk you through the sections of this bill and why it is important today. Thank you.
Ms. Louie, before Ms. Reese begins, can you please spell your name for the record?
Of course. So for the record, my name is Savon Louie. It is spelled C-E-V-A-N, last name Louie, L-O-U-I-E.
Thank you.
I wasn't nervous until Savon just gave a great presentation, so.
Well, she has her timer set, so please make sure that.
Yes, I'll read mine very fast then. Good morning, Chair Miller, Vice Chair Marzola, and the Assembly Committee on Judiciary. My name is Chris Reese, R-I-E-S, and I proudly represent the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. First, I would like to thank Senator Wynn for this opportunity to present alongside of her, as well as sponsoring this important legislation. In 2022, there were over 2,500 reported thefts involving catalytic converters in LVMPD's jurisdiction. To be sure, this is just the reported thefts. It does not include the victim that notices their catalytic converter stolen and then just repairs it without notifying law enforcement. Even more, we have seen an increase in recent years of this theft. From 2019 to 2022, catalytic converter thefts have increased over 1,200%. An experienced thief can remove a catalytic converter very quickly with equipment easily found at the local hardware store. The cost to the victim can be thousands of dollars, not to mention the time, energy, and stress that it also causes. Nearly every one of your constituents has either been affected by catalytic converter thefts or knows someone who has. Nonprofit organizations, rental car companies, school buses, even the beloved Oscar Mayer Wienermobile have been victims of this crime. Currently, stealing catalytic converters is difficult to prosecute for several reasons. Many of our arrests are from individuals caught in the act of stealing or attempting to steal a catalytic converter. However, if that person was not actually seen stealing the catalytic converter and was just observed with the catalytic converter in their possession, the likelihood of bringing that person to justice is minimal. For example, if a patrol officer stops a person with 5 catalytic converters, experience tells us that that person stole those and did not obtain them legally. However, the officer typically cannot arrest on the thefts and rather would arrest on possession of burglary tools or injure or tamper with vehicle. This law will allow us to arrest on both the theft of the stolen catalytic converter and or the possession of the stolen catalytic converter. Even further, this will allow us to better track the thefts of those catalytic converters. Without any changes in our current statutes, we can expect to see the continued rise in thefts of catalytic converters. And I'll hand it back off to Senator Nguyen. Thank you.
Thank you. Rochelle Nguyen, Nguyen for the record. And thank you to my co-presenters for presenting some background information. You can tell that Ms. Louie is a debate champion nationally and statewide based on her speed and the timing of the presentation. But I will try to slow it down just a little bit here to go through some of the aspects of this bill. We kind of heard some of the reasons why we need this bill, but I guess I'll start off with the first question. What does this bill do to address the problem, and why don't we have laws in place to already correct this type of crime or prosecute this type of crime? As you heard before, this is a unique and quick nature of a crime. Often police are unable to catch people in the act of stealing catalytic converter because it happens so quickly. Sometimes people will ask, well, let's say you see someone outside of a neighborhood and they have a shopping cart full of catalytic converters, and you know that there was a whole neighborhood of houses that were hit with catalytic converter theft. If they don't have that person on camera, that's readily and easily identifiable, and they don't catch the person in the actual act, there's nothing on that catalytic converter that can attach to any particular car. And so there isn't any kind of distinguishing marks between catalytic converters and the cars that they were stolen from. I know that a lot of our law enforcement partners have done things to try to correct this, and on the national level there are efforts to require manufacturers to print VIN numbers on that, but right now we don't have that. I know there are places up here in the north in Washoe County where you can go and have your VIN number heat stamped or heat painted onto your catalytic converter, and there are other devices that you can buy to secure your catalytic converter. But I'll be honest with you, even with some of those more secure baskets or nets things that prevent your catalytic converter from being stolen quickly, it still just adds minutes, sometimes seconds, to the theft. And so you aren't catching people in the act of this, and there's no way to attach the victim's catalytic converter to the victim's car. We heard stories when I presented this in the Senate of people posting on their neighborhood next door pages or Facebook pages, pictures of people walking through their neighborhood with a shopping cart full of catalytic converters. And when I talked to Metro and I talked to our local law enforcement partners around the state, I asked them what would they be able to charge that person with. And unfortunately their answer was a possession of stolen property for the shopping cart, not the catalytic converters. I think it's also really important to understand who is being victimized in our community. Much like all of us, when you're talking about the bills you're working on, you're talking to people about unassuming partners. So I had talked to law enforcement, I had talked to my neighbors, Most of my district is not contained within walls or HOAs, and so there is a lot of this type of theft because people don't have garages. Like in my neighborhood, no one has garages, and so people are parking their cars in carports or on the streets, and so they're just easily accessible. And so some of the solutions to like park your car in your garage are just not available to a lot of members of our communities. I talked to nonprofits. Boys and Girls Club had like over $75,000. I think it was Boys and Girls Club had over, or maybe it was the YMCA, had over $75,000 in catalytic converter theft to their vans and buses, to the point where they had to start parking their vehicles either in the gymnasium or across the street at the fire department to avoid that kind of loss. We've seen this anywhere with a parking lot. You'll hear from auto dealers. You will hear from rental car agencies. You will hear from the resort industry. Anyone with a parking lot is experiencing this, and then we're also experiencing it inside our home communities and residential neighborhoods. There's a couple of things that this bill seeks to address, and it's really two parts. One, it goes after allowing our law enforcement agencies consistent with other types of theft. So while this is a new crime for possession of a used catalytic converter, if you have more than two, there are defenses that are built in. So if you're a scrap dealer, if you're a mechanic, if you have like a reason to, if you have a legitimate business reason to have more than one used catalytic converter, you are not included in this. But it is to target those crimes that we're unable to prosecute at this time. And I say that it's consistent. A lot of people know that I've been a criminal defense attorney as well as a public defender for the majority of my 21 years in that field. And you know, I don't think we should just throw and make new crimes just to make new crimes, because I don't think that solves anything. But this solves a problem that we're not able to capture. If this person was caught in the act of stealing this catalytic converter, it would be a theft. It would be a felony theft. And so if you are caught with multiple of these in possession of them and you have no legitimate reason to have them and you can't trace them to a vehicle that you own or possess, then that should also be treated similarly. Second of all, this also has accountability for those people that are purchasing these catalytic converters. A lot of times people, and you know, it's my opinion, people probably wouldn't steal these if there wasn't a market to sell them. And so this is also taking a serious look, and I've worked a lot with the scrap metal industry. There are a lot of players that do not even engage in this type of like sale. On the other hand, there are people that advertise with big vinyl signs outside of their businesses that say, "We buy catalytic converters." And so this kind of addresses that as well in the last part of the bill, to make sure that there's accountability on that side, that they have to do the simple requirements that they would have to do if they were collecting other types of scrap metal that is routinely stolen, like copper, or at a pawn shop where you have to provide some other type of documentation. And then there's an accountability section where they will have to provide some of that information to local law enforcement to give them the ability to prosecute as well as the legislature, to make sure that this bill is actually having the intended effective intent to stop catalytic converter theft. And so with that, I can go through the bill and the reprint if the chair would like, or I can be open for questions, whatever is your pleasure.
Yes, please, Senator, if you could take us through the policy, the actual components of the bill briefly. Thank you.
I will do that. Rochelle Wynn for the record. I'll start with Section 2 of the bill because it defines the offense of catalytic converter theft and who is in possession of two or more used catalytic converters, or who is not properly licensed in a business that regularly deals with catalytic converters, or who cannot otherwise prove through documentation that he or she is their lawful owner of the catalytic converter. And therefore, it creates kind of the definition and the framework for this new charge, this new felony charge of being in possession of a used catalytic converter. Section 3 goes on to prohibit the purchase of catalytic converters from anyone other than a properly licensed business or person who can prove ownership of that converter. And I will make it very clear. It is, and you will hear testimony during support, it's not like you can take a used catalytic converter and really put it on another vehicle. the purpose of taking off a used taking catalytic converter is to get those precious metals and sell it. So there are very, very, very limited circumstances where you would even have these like available to use. Section 4 sets out the penalties associated with illegal theft, possession, and sale of a catalytic converter. You can see that there is a difference in penalty for that person that maybe has 2 of these as opposed to someone who has 10 of these. And I think that's consistent in showing that this is likely a theft that has happened like multiple times and victimized multiple people in the community. That we may not be able to identify. And those penalties for theft are consistent with other theft charges that we have here in the state. Most of the time, our theft charges, the distinguishing mark between like a petty larceny misdemeanor and a felony theft is that $1,200 threshold. And when you steal one of these catalytic converters, you will hear that it is routinely around $2,500 to replace. And that's how we came up with kind of those penalties. They're consistent with other theft charges. Section 8 sets forth provisions governing which entities a properly licensed business is allowed to purchase used catalytic converters from. And this mirrors provisions that I've already discussed earlier on who can legally possess and sell used catalytic converters that are in those first sections 1 and 2. Section 9 requires scrap metal processors to keep detailed records of every catalytic converter purchase they make, including information on the date and place of the purchase, the identity of the seller, a description of the vehicle delivering the converter, a description of the vehicle from which the converter came, and, if applicable, a copy of the title vehicle and its vehicle identification number or VIN number. Similarly, detailed information must be provided by the seller and included in the record. And if one scrap metal processor sells a catalytic converter to another, these records must also be kept, and detailed records of those sales must also be made and kept for no less than 2 years. And part of this was in order to create this verifiable paper trail for all of these types of transactions. Section 10 also provides that some of these steps can be avoided in the case of a processor and seller having a prior written agreement in place regarding the transactions, as long as there is a log kept that makes identifying catalytic converter in the scrap metal processor's inventory possible. Section 14 of the bill adds used catalytic converters to the list of scrap metal items that law enforcement may require information gathered by scrap metal processors, and this information largely mirrors, again, that section and those requirements in Section 10. And the statistics used for catalytic converter will also be now added to the list of reports from law enforcement that are submitted to the Legislative Counsel Bureau. So all of us legislators can review that and gauge the effectiveness of this legislation. And finally, Section 15 sets forth penalties for those who violate relevant provisions of this bill. And those misdemeanors range in a fine of $1,000 to $4,000 for a first to a third and any subsequent offense. And that is on the part of the people purchasing those, in addition to any potential criminal penalties that they might suffer as well. So with that, I will open myself up to any questions your committee may have, Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator. With that, our first question will be from Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, it's funny, I'm a YouTube junkie. I mean, some people like TikTok. Yeah, I like my YouTube. But there was an advertisement on there last night for somebody buying used, it was a business buying used catalytic converters. So I'm wondering if there's going to be some way, because it's obviously being done through the mail, if there's going to be some way to cut out, obviously if somebody's not in this state, but to maybe get the U.S. mail involved or whoever to keep this from happening, because they're just going to find the next buyer that's out of state that's not bound by our laws.
Rochelle Wynn for the record. This is a very real problem. And you will see, and just in my research, this would be, if we were to pass Senate Bill 243, this would be a kind of a groundbreaking piece of legislation in our state. And I think it is something that states surrounding us would look to. I know California recently passed a series of bills that were aimed and targeted at catalytic converter theft. And so our neighboring states are all addressing this. I think there was legislation started in every single state in the West, and I know across the country, because this isn't a unique problem to Nevada. I know that collecting this information and making it more difficult here, people may go and sell across the state. And I know just in reading the paper, the U.S. Attorney here in the state of Nevada, U.S. Attorney Jason Frierson, he was a part of an operation that brought a bunch of people that were selling used catalytic converters as well. So I believe this is something that would help here, and hopefully other people around us will take any legislation that we pass and show that it can be successful if we all enact it, like collectively as a country.
All right, thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's good to see you all. And for anyone wondering if Savon is always this calm and cool, she is. I've seen her introduce a presidential candidate like, she was introducing her friend. It's no big deal for her. But so my question is going back to the definition in Section 2, Sub 2E. So I think when I hear this bill, I know what we're trying to target, and I think that's important, but I think of people like my dad and his friends down the street who are the type of guys that have workshops that, have their garages they're pack rats. They're filled with every tool, 3 versions of every tool you'd ever want, that all the guys they know all know they can come to them if they need a tool, if they need anything for fixing something around their house or something for fixing their car. How are we not including people like that who just happen to have a lot of stuff and like to repair things? And then also people who maybe they are on the fringes, maybe they do get some stuff that they shouldn't have, but they're, people who repair cars out of their houses or something like that, but they're not specifically buying things that are illegal. I guess that's kind of 2 parts, but if you could address that, please.
Rochelle Lynn for the record. No, it's a very good question. It's definitely something that we thought about when we were drafting, some of these definitions and who would be included in there. And you can see we started off with some of the obvious things like an automobile wrecker, a scrap metal processor, a manufacturer, distributor, dealer, a rebuilder, a licensed, and any other business they may reasonably generate that. And then Section E was intended to be that catch-all. It was intended to be that section that allowed for, the tinkerer, the person who has maybe multiple cars, maybe goes to auction and buys junk vehicles for parts and has all of those parts. And part of the reason is we said including but without limitation some of those items. So if you have a legitimate reason to have used catalytic converters, like you bought them you will have documentation of that. If you're even in a desperate situation where you want to cut off your own catalytic converter and take it in and sell it because you want to, makes $500 to $750, just like you would if you were pawning off, an important piece of jewelry or anything. This allows you, and that's the intention of that definition section, is to say, hey, look, we understand that some people are going to have these. Some people may want to even cut them off their own vehicles and sell them because they need the money. And this gives them kind of the ability to show ownership of those catalytic converters.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, and I appreciate that, but I also do wonder, some of those people I don't think can prove proper ownership, especially over the last few years, because a lot of these people will keep things for years and years and years, and maybe they had proof at one point, maybe they didn't, maybe they got it years ago and just did not have the proof and didn't realize that there was a black market and bought it from a guy and thought it was legit. And I'm just worried that those people are going to get caught up with this. And that, I understand that's not the intent to catch those people, but I want to make sure that we're very clear about that that's not the intent. Because all we're going to have in the future is people looking at the statute and not, necessarily watching this hearing.
Thank you, Rochelle Wynn, for the record. It's definitely something that I thought about. I think that this is such a unique product that you aren't going to have a lot of people that have used catalytic converters in their. Like I said, if it is taken off and it is used and it has been cut off, you can't just put it on another car. It is not like a transferable type item. And I think under those kind of circumstances, I do trust our law enforcement partners that they will use like the discretion that they have in, I'm not even sure what the scenario would be where the police were even called out and the person had more than one used catalytic converter and had no proof. So I think it is just such it's not a scenario I think that you would see very often. But I understand your concerns with the overreach that our law enforcement agencies might use in that thing, and they might be able to address some of the discretion and some of the circumstances that they would use in their investigation in a scenario like that. And I can turn it over. If that's okay.
Chris Reese for the record. Yeah, it's a totality of the circumstances. So, the scenario with your dad in his garage, I don't think that would meet a level of what this bill is trying to do. It's more of the person that is driving a car and has 40 of them in the trunk. And the other thing I would say is that if you take a catalytic converter off of a car, you can etch the VIN number into it, and those I think would have some sort of ownership. Registration of the vehicle. So I think the bill, your concern is extremely valid, and we don't want to, we don't want to capture those people. We do want to capture the people that are stealing the catalytic converters. And I think this bill, along with, just writing the VIN number on that catalytic converter that was taken off the vehicle, would address your concerns, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question is from Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. Listening to they can't be, once you've taken them off, they can't be replaced, that they're being taken for the specific types of metals that are in there. What is required, or how difficult is it to take the catalytic converter and remove the metals that are necessary to put this in that system? And can somebody do that, or is this only going to be like professional recyclers or processors, or how does that work? Because we're hearing that people are cutting these things off. They're walking around with shopping carts full of them. If you can't get them out, or out easily, that metal out easily, I'm wondering how organized this is, and if this is more of a sort of a pyramid type crime, or if there's just random people doing it because they can go anywhere and sell it. I guess there's two questions in there. Thanks.
Chris Reese for the record. Thank you for your question. It's not as easy as it would be to take the catalytic converter off to get the precious metals out of it. You can do it. More often than not, they're taking these to a scrapyard or a secondhand dealer, and they would be the ones to take it off. We have seen where people cut the catalytic converter open and scoop out those precious metals. So it's not impossible, but it takes a little bit of time. In terms of a larger pyramid kind of thing, we see quite a bit of coordination. A lot of times we see a lot of these catalytic converters, so it's not the single person that goes out and steals one. Typically it's more than that. And so, again, with the graduated, penalties, I think that it makes sense that, 2 to 9 would be a Cat D felony, and then over that, which is quite a bit of catalytic converters, would be that Class C felony.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. So my follow-up is, for these metals, do we know who the buyers of the metals are? And whether or not their purchases spike, or do we keep track of any of that?
Rochelle Wynn, we don't right now, and that's why that's included in this section of the bill. You will hear from some of the scrap metal people that I've been working on this piece of legislation that they just won't buy it. And I think we can trust and verify, and this allows us to verify to see who they are. But I will tell you, it was brought to my attention outside in Reno, outside of parole and probation, there is one of these like scrap metal recyclers, and they have a big giant vinyl sign, and it says, "We buy catalytic converters." So there are clearly people buying them. How many they're buying, how many they're like purchasing, what condition they're purchasing them in, this will allow us to follow that to find out how many they are, how many people are still engaging in this, and there will be a record of those types of transactions.
Thank you. I, Senator, have a few questions about this as well, and one is, I guess the first one was answered to the Assemblywoman. So I will ask, one, first, can you describe an opportunity or how someone would go about buying, like, is there an opportunity to legally purchase a catalytic converter? Is there a reason, is there an opportunity, or is the only sole purpose would be for a mechanic or, for the creation of a car?
Rochelle Wynn, for the record, I think I can clarify this pretty quickly. This is only used catalytic converters. This is not new catalytic converters. So if you want to go on Amazon, which you can, and buy a catalytic converter, you can do that. If you want to go through the manufacturer and buy a new catalytic converter, you can do that. If you want to buy 100 new catalytic converters, you can do that, and you can have them in your garage. You can tinker around, and if you want to replace your own catalytic converter, you can order it, you can do it in your house, and there are no issues with owning as many new catalytic converters as you want. This is really limited in this definition to used catalytic converters.
So I can legally purchase catalytic converters?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Rochelle Wynn, for the record. Yes, you may.
And with that, how is it determined if it's used or not? Is it based on the VIN numbers, or is there some type of product where an expert can tell that this is used or not?
When it's used, it's like literally they're taking a saw and sawing it off the vehicle. So that's why it's not reusable.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the condition, it's the appearance would identify that it's used. Okay.
And I think we have some people also, I'll just look back here, if there are people that have that in the industry can answer that question. I see Andy McKay back there. I'm gonna make him start getting those answers for us as well.
Okay. And one last question before we move on with questions. I'm curious to see, because it seems like this criminalization would be based on possession. That again, if I have these items in my possession, this is indicative of the fact that they were stolen. So can you tell me, in state law in Nevada, what other items do we consider just the possession of these items or the amount of this possession to be proof, basically, that those items were stolen?
Rochelle Wynn, for the record. I think the perfect example that we see is possession of identifying information of another. If I have a possession of
A shoebox of passports?
yes, if I do, and if I have more than two of them, there's a presumption that I have them for illegal uses. And the state no longer has to prove that intent. It's one of our unique kind of rebuttable, presumption type felonies that we have. So that is a felony. So if I have Saman's ID and I have Chris's ID, and they haven't given me permission of it, I have to prove that I have permission from both of them to have that. Just like your box of passports or IDs. It's players' cards at casinos. Those are considered forms of ID as well. So if I had 10 players' cards from multiple people, and I had the prosecution would not have to prove that I had bad intent. It is assumed in that. This doesn't even go that far. A lot of us don't really like the idea of rebuttable presumptions where you have to prove your innocence because that's not typically what we do in this country. And so this actually, the prosecutor would have to prove that. This doesn't have a rebuttable presumption. In fact, we took that rebuttable presumption language. So they would have to prove that you didn't have, that you had ownership or you didn't have ownership of 2 or more catalytic converters. Like I said, you can have one. If you have 2, that's where you run into problems.
Is there anything else that requires the physical removal? So with that example, ID crime, that's a crime of like more so effort, often creating IDs or stealing information to create IDs. Is there anything else that's just good old fashioned burglary?
It's not. They're not creating IDs for the possession of ID of another. This is like you've
The
stolen
actual-
these ideas, like IDs. Like you've gone to a casino, you've taken multiple purses, and you have all these identifying, credit cards. You have IDs of other people. You have players' cards. You have all that information for multiple people. That's a situation where you might not be able to prove the crime of theft, but now you're proving the crime of possession of that.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator, for the bill. I just wanted to clarify, the catalytic converter is a piece of equipment related to internal combustion engines, correct? So as more electric cars come out, there will be fewer of these in existence. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, they are. So for the record, I'm Savon Louis. So yes, they are. They only relate to automobiles that have the exhaust systems and are producing those said emissions. So like carbon dioxide and like nitrogen oxide. So if you look at electric vehicles that don't produce those said emissions and don't require that gas emissions because they're not using gas. So yeah, it's true.
And Rochelle Wynn, for the record, just to follow up on that, I think this is why this hit home in my district that I represent, and I know it is probably true of a lot of my colleagues up here in the assembly in their districts is these are really targeting certain vehicles, and they tend to be older vehicles. There are certain vehicles that are easier to take off. And so they are older vehicles. And for me, it is, if someone with $100,000 car has their catalytic converter taken off, they might have another car. They might be able to afford rideshare. They might be able to have another spouse or another community, like someone in their family that can drive them around. They may have multiple vehicles in that car. And because of the older nature of some of these vehicles that are targeted in these catalytic converter thefts, it is further victimizing people that need that vehicle to get to work. And now all of a sudden they can't get to work. They might not be able to afford the insurance, a deductible in order to get a new catalytic converter. Because of the supply chain issues, they are now waiting for a catalytic converter months and months away to be able to replace that to make their car operable. Or they are driving around, and you probably heard someone without a catalytic converter, and further destroying their vehicle because it's a very loud noise now that your car is making. And now your car may not last that as long as you anticipated it would last. So that was something that I was definitely concerned about and was part of my motivation in bringing this bill. So thank you for that question.
Okay, with that, I don't see any additional questions, so I will open it up for testimony. So we'll start here in Carson City. Is there anyone here that would like to come and testify in support of Senate Bill 243? Please remember to state your name and spell it so that we have it correct for the record.
Good morning. My name is John Abel, John-Abel. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the LVPPA. Before I did that, I was a street cop, pushed to black and white for 13 years. I've done hundreds of car stops, I've been in thousands of homes, I've been in thousands of garages, and I cannot think of a time I've ever seen anyone with a catalytic converter. I say that now because if I'm out there still and I'm pushing to black and white and I see someone with a catalytic converter, they probably stole it, to be honest with you. It's just, they're very hard to steal unless you have the wireless tools to do it. And that's the reason why this law was created, because it used to not be easy to steal catalytic converters. And with the inventions of wireless tools and things like that, that's what made it easier. And I've known people that have had catalytic converters stolen from their vehicles, and times you have to have your car towed and you have to report it to your insurance company. So it's just a very difficult crime to deal with. So, and I know that Senator Wynn has worked hard on this bill and talked to the stakeholders. So we appreciate her bringing this bill, and I ditto everything that Chris Reese said. So thank you very much.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Alfredo Alonso with law firm of Lewis and Roca today on behalf of the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which is all of the manufacturers, I believe about 23 manufacturers worldwide. And we thank Senator Wynn for bringing this bill. I think it's the smartest bill we've seen so far dealing with this issue. Just so that everyone understands, there are about 158 different manufacturers of catalytic converters in the U.S. alone. So there's no way to identify them. They're made for certain brands. Some are made for certain size engines. It varies so much that, and especially in a world post-COVID where you're having trouble getting them in the first place. It is a very difficult situation now in terms of attaining them. So a lot of companies have come out and started doing manufacturing them as well, but no one can keep up because obviously they're being stolen at record numbers right now. To give everyone an idea, there are two types. There's the direct fit, which is obviously made for a specific vehicle, and then there are some that do fit other vehicles. But to the point that was made earlier, people just don't keep these in their garages. You might keep, in older vehicles, you might keep various parts for your engine, et cetera. You might actually think, well, I'm going to keep all this stuff. I've known those people that will keep multiple parts. Catalytic converters are not one of them. They just aren't. They look like a flattened loaf of bread, and they weigh between 10 and 20 pounds. So it's not something you're just putting, under your arm and carrying around. And so I think when you see I've never seen someone have one in there, and I've been involved in various instances where I know folks that have, vehicles, that work on vehicles, never seen one kept around, for that matter, multiple. So we thank Senator Wynn. It's a good approach, it's a fair approach, and I think it may actually solve some of our problems. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Andy McKay, I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Franchise Auto Dealers Association. I think the previous speakers have summarized this pretty well. First off, I want to thank Senator Wynn for introducing this piece of legislation. As Mr. Alonso said, it's the smartest bill, and I think this is the smartest bill probably in the entire union. This is going to be a bill that I think states are going to ultimately model after. This is a priority not only of ours, it's our national association in every state across the union. There are two measures that are going through Congress. We know how functional Congress is, so yeah, they're going to actually fix it in time. So applaud her for addressing this. A couple of things just to show you in terms of the impact. I pulled some of our dealers, and this is just one dealership in Las Vegas. Last year alone, they had $27,000 in catalytic converters stolen from vehicles that were on the lot of the dealer. Further $20,000 in damages just in terms of individuals cutting gates, cutting fences to get in and access the lot to be able to steal these catalytic converters. But I think most importantly is who are the biggest victims, and those are your constituents. Last year, the store had over $40,000 in repairs just for the cost of the catalytic converters that were stolen. Now remember, that's one store in Las Vegas. So this is a chronic problem, and what Senator Wynn is doing is going to address it from both sides. And I think this is a smart piece of legislation. We sincerely encourage the committee's consideration and support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Terry Graves, today representing the Nevada Trucking Association as well as Nevada Manufacturing Association, and also 2 scrap metal processing companies, Engine Quest in Las Vegas and Western Metals Recycling in Sparks, Nevada.
Mr. Graves, can you, before you proceed with your testimony, spell your name for the record?
I'm sorry,
Could you please spell your name for the record before you
Sure.
proceed?
Terry, Terry, Graves, Graves. Legitimate scrap metal process has long been involved in attempting to reduce metal theft in the days of copper theft, and now attempting to help with catalytic converter theft. We had concerns about the requirement of the issue of checks in this bill. I think that has been corrected. We can now use electronic transfers, which my client Engine Quest does not do checks anymore. They only do ACH, so I believe that's been taken care of in this bill. Further, just to describe the process for a legitimate scrap metal processor, if a seller brings a catalytic converter to their store, they will pay $300 to $400 for that catalytic converter. And this would be from a legitimate repair shop, or they may get a scrap vehicle in that still has the catalytic converter on it. From there, he would sell that catalytic converter to a reprocessor or a refiner. That refiner will tear that catalytic converter apart, reclaim the rare earth minerals in it, and then return those rare earth minerals back to manufacturers that would install them in a new product. It's to be pointed out that federal law does not allow the reuse of a catalytic converter. And that has something to do also with EPA standards for emission controls. There's no way to recertify a used catalytic converter, that is economically recertify. So for somebody to reuse a used catalytic converter is actually illegal. Further,
So, Mr. Graves, do you support the bill as written in the reprint?
absolutely, we do.
Okay.
And thank Senator Gwynn for that. And one comment from our copper theft days, if you can catch a few of these thieves, you find out that it's a small population doing most of the thefts. And this bill will hopefully allow to catch a few of these folks and make a deep cut into the amount of thefts that are occurring. These,
Thank you so much for your testimony, Mr. Graves.
I'll wrap up with that. I'd just like to remind you that today is Nevada Trucking Day at the Legislature.
Oh. And I would love to say that's exactly why I scheduled it for today, but we'll just go with that, right?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Members of the committee, my name is Vincent Guthrow. I serve, last name is spelled Gutreau. First name is Vincent, Vinson. I serve as the Executive Director of the Nevada Association of Counties, or NACO. We are in support of this measure, this attempt to address this massive issue across our state. When reaching out to our members, this has also impacted county vehicles across the state as well. And so we thank Senator Wynn for crafting this solution and engaging stakeholders in the interim to develop this bill. And again, NACO is in support of SB 243. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Isaac Hardy, representing Nevada Pick Apart, SA Recycling, and the Urban Consortium, which is made up of Reno, Sparks, Henderson, Las Vegas, and North Las Vegas. We are in full support of this bill. This has been an ongoing issue that local governments are trying really hard to resolve. I believe North Las Vegas has already adopted an ordinance addressing this issue. However, we need a more universal solution, I guess. We need to protect the single mothers, single fathers that go out to their car 6:30 in the morning, turn it on to go to work, and their catalytic converter's gone. And now they can't use their car. And now they're out $2,500, $6,000. We believe that this bill will protect people like that. We want to thank Senator Wynn for making sure we get this thing right. She's put in a lot of effort, and we thank her very much. We urge the committee support. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jake Matthews with Carrera, Nevada, here on behalf of our client, Copart. Copart specializes in the resale and remarketing of used, wholesale, and salvage title vehicles for a variety of sellers, including insurance companies, rental car companies, and local municipalities. Copart is in full support of SB 243 and urges its passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is John Jones, and I'm here on behalf of the Nevada District Attorneys Association. We are in support of SB 243 as it is a comprehensive cure for the problem it's seeking to solve, and we want to thank Senator Wynn for bringing the bill. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Nick Schneider. That's SCHNEIDER, representing the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is in support of SB 243, and we'd like to just echo the comments made by my colleagues before us, and I would like to just add, not only does a catalytic converter theft result in about $2,500 in repairs, but for a small business especially, this also adds a loss of revenue for the downtime of that vehicle, as well as increased insurance premiums. And for that reason, we're in support of SB 243. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. For the record, my name is Michael Alonso, and I'm here on behalf of AT&T in support of Senate Bill 243. AT&T was a member of the coalition that worked to modify scrap metal laws during the 75th legislative session back in 2009, and we're here today to thank Senator Wynn for bringing this bill forward. AT&T operates a fleet of nearly 375 motor vehicles in the state of Nevada, and we're not immune from catalytic converter thefts. In the past 2 years, approximately 20 catalytic converters have been stolen from vehicles in our gated and fenced yards. These specifically target our bucket trucks because they sit higher off the ground, providing easier access to the catalytic converter. These thefts occur because there's a robust resale market in stolen materials. The thefts impede our ability to provide reliable and consistent service to our customers. We appreciate Senator Wynn working with all interested parties to bring Senate Bill 243 forward and are pleased to add our support. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Chelsea Capurro here on behalf of MGM Resorts International. I want to echo everyone's comments in support and thank the Senator for bringing this bill.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. Jason Walker, JASONWALKER, Washington County Sheriff's Office, putting out the official Me Too in support of Senate Bill 243.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the Judiciary Committee. Greg Herrera for the record, GREG, last of Herrera, HERRERA, representing Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. We are in support of Senate Bill 243 and I'd like to thank Senator Wynn for working with law enforcement and other stakeholders in bringing this bill forward. We believe this bill will assist law enforcement in tackling the significant problem that affects communities throughout the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Mike Cathcart, MIKECATHCART, representing the City of Henderson. Just want to thank Senator Wynn and Detective Reese from the Metropolitan Police Department on all their work on this bill. This was one of the highest priorities of our police department coming into session, and we appreciate the bill. Thank you.
Is there anyone else here in Carson City that would like to testify in support? Not seeing anyone. Is there anyone in Las Vegas? Not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please, for anyone that would like to testify in support of Senate Bill 243?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then I will open it up for opposition testimony. If there's anyone here in Carson City that would like to oppose SB 243? Not seeing anyone. Is there anyone there in Las Vegas? Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please, for opposition testimony?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then I will open it up for testimony in neutral of Senate Bill 243. Is there anyone here in Carson City? Not seeing anyone? Is there anyone there? Literally, is there anyone there in Las Vegas? Not seeing anyone broadcasting, will you please open the lines?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then with that, I will close testimony on Senate Bill 243 and welcome Senator Wynn back up for any final remarks. No final remarks. So then with that, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 243, but welcome Senator Wynn back up as I open the hearing for Senate Bill 104, which revises provisions relating to traffic offenses. So Senator, once you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning again. You're getting a lot of me today. I appreciate your time and energy to listening to both of these bills. My name is Rochelle Wynn, and I am bringing Senate Bill 104. It is a cleanup bill, and I'm sure you have heard that multiple times this session, and I can look around, and there are so many new people on this committee, and there are some other people that were here in the last session. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on what Senate Bill 104 does. This is a cleanup bill of Assembly Bill 116 of the 81st session and Senate Bill 219 of the 81st session. Senate Bill 219 of the 81st first session authorizes the court to suspend a driver's license of a defendant in certain circumstances. The bill was sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Nicole Cannizzaro and had extreme bipartisan support in both houses of the legislature. And in fact, Senate Bill 219 passed out of the Assembly 34-8, and in the Senate it passed 17-4. I had the privilege of carrying Assembly Bill 116 of the 81st session, and this bill decriminalized certain minor traffic offenses, and it also passed with bipartisan support. In fact, Assembly Bill 116 passed 42-1 in the Assembly and 20-1 in the Senate. This bill seeks to address some of the inconsistencies that inadvertently took place between Senate Bill 219 and AB 116, particularly as they relate to the suspension of a person's driver's license. But more importantly, what this Senate Bill 104 does is it cleans up a lot of the implementation language that we have come to learn has taken place in the implementation of Assembly Bill 116 from the 81st legislative session. I will tell you that Senate Bill 104, I was able to get that one vote that voted against Assembly Bill 116 in the 81st session. Senator Hansen had voted no, and he proudly voted yes on this cleanup bill. And I think he recognized that there was a lot of effort that went into this. And to give those new members some background on Assembly Bill 116, when I brought it in the 81st session, I was the 5th person to bring it. And my predecessors before me that kind of paved the way to be able to pass that legislation in such an overwhelmingly bipartisan manner were, I think the first bill was brought by Michelle Fiore when she was in this body, and then it was brought by Tick Segerblum, and then it was again brought by Jason Frierson, and the session prior, it was brought by your now Speaker, Steve Yeagers. So I felt like they really paved that path and also expressed how this was a nonpartisan issue. This was something that everyone could get behind, and that's why you had the votes that you had. With that being said, this bill went into effect on January 1st of this year. So there are lots of cleanup measures that we are still, even today, in the process of trying to clean up and trying to figure out how we can have that legislative intent actually be, implemented appropriately. We have some jurisdictions that are having an easier time, and we have some that are struggling to find a pathway forward. And even this Wednesday, I have another working group on this. I always tease that I will probably be bringing a cleanup bill to 116 every year of that I am, humbly elected to this body. So with that, I will kind of go through a lot of the things that we implemented in this bill were just cleanup. Things like we have a ticket that required information about the issuing police officer. And then we learned that like our Paiute tribal like police use Metro's police like tickets. And so it doesn't make sense for that to be included on there. And also it added to confusion. I think when people receive a ticket, they want to know, it's already says who the ticket was issued by and what the police officer and their P number was on that ticket. But I think putting the name and telephone number and address and website for the agency probably is confusing because then people won't realize that they need to go to a court and not to the police station to handle their ticket. We had some other issues when it came to protections for those jurisdictions that continued to have prosecutors. They wanted prosecutors in there prosecuting those civil infractions. And so this gave them some flexibility as well as some immunity, that normal prosecutorial immunity that they would have. They would continue to have that if they chose to be a part of the civil infraction, process as well. We added some language that it could be requested. A lot of our courts are moving towards electronic notifications, whether it's text message or emailing, to remind people of when their fines are due, to remind people to pay their ticket, to remind people to do those things. And so we added some language in there that allows the collection if people want to participate in like receiving text message notifications. And we found that to be something that is effective in getting people to pay their tickets. Sometimes getting that text reminder from the court or that you have a ticket that's due and how you can do it with a corresponding link to how you can pay for that ticket or do your traffic school is probably more modern approach to getting people and reminding people to do what they are obligated to do under the law. We also gave some flexibility and we asked the courts to kind of come up with a process for how they would set aside default judgments. So what this did when we decriminalized some of these minor traffic infractions, instead of having to have a police officer that comes into court, having to take them off of the streets, having to take them off of doing their job, they can now submit an affidavit and they can get that information and that can be presented to the court. So instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard, now we have a preponderance of the evidence, which is a much lower standard. So we will see people being able to move through this process quicker, and we will take our needed peace officers and public safety people, keep them on the streets and out of the courtroom because they will be able to provide some of that kind of information. For those of you that were not here, we also give some flexibility. If something is charged as a criminal citation and after the prosecutors do their full investigation and they choose they want to amend it down to a civil infraction, they have that ability to do that. We also wanted to make sure and put some further clarity in the law. Again, it was always our intent, and I think that this is what is happening. If you are pulled over for, a broken taillight, and when the police officer comes to give you your civil citation, they realize you're under the influence, or they smell alcohol, or they see other crimes, they can still continue that investigation onto those criminal things. So that doesn't change their job in the field at all, and neither did 116. But this brings further clarification to make sure that we understand that this is first and foremost about public safety. I'm trying to think of anything else. There are a couple of sections that we are continually working on that have come to my attention even since this passed out of the Senate 21-0, is we are learning now that there are exorbitant requirements for people posting a bond if they do want to challenge their civil infraction. So if you get a civil infraction and you do want to challenge it and your ticket amount would be $250, now there are some courts, not all of them, that are requiring a $250 bond to be posted before you can even challenge the ticket. So we are looking at some of those problems. There are some implementation problems that are taking place in some of the courts on how they set aside default judgments. Some of them don't think they can set a default judgment. So what that means is you get a ticket, you forget to pay it, and it goes into default, you're sent to collections, and you call like the next day, then, or 90 days, you call like, and you realize that you want to pay it, you just missed it. We're working on a process or ordering the courts to come up with a process so people can go ahead and pay that ticket if they want to, and they don't have to go through that process. So those are some of the things that we are continually working on. So I would like to say that this bill and its reprint is the final thing, but if we were to get a work session on this bill, I anticipate there will be probably some additional changes as this bill was just implemented January 1st of 2023. So just, now, just 5 months ago. So I imagine we will see this, and like I said, I imagine I will be back here session after session trying to further clean up any of the language that's included in here. And with that, I will be open to any questions you might have.
Thank you for that, Senator, and that is absolutely fine. I'd like to remind people that we're still working on the U.S. Constitution and even our Nevada State Constitution. So session after session, we anticipate that. With that, members, do we have any questions? I don't see any questions per se, but there is, excuse me? Yeah. But I do see, as you can see, there are members that aren't here that are actively paying attention. So we will ghost a question in a moment. First,
That is
I'll go.
fine, too.
Yeah. That's the thing. Members may not physically be sitting here, but that doesn't mean they're not engaged. But we'll go ahead and start with Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Senator Wynn. I was curious on section 2.8, subpoint 2. And it goes over the Board of County Commissioners may provide by ordinance a violation or a traffic ordinance that would be enacted by the Board of County Commissioners. I'm not familiar with traffic ordinances that they would necessarily put into place. Do you have any examples of that, or can you give sort of the genesis of that particular change?
Rochelle Wynn for the record. I don't know if I can come up with examples, but I can explain why they need that authority. So currently we have certain traffic offenses that are contained in the NRS. And so any of those that are contained in the NRS cover those traffic matters. So if you are pulled over for speeding, you're given a ticket under the NRS. And that is kind of also determines where the money goes from that, some of it even going to the permanent education fund. So that's where tickets that are written off of the NRS go. When there is a gap in any kind of law, to be quite honest, and there is no NRS for that, but a county or a city, most of their charters allow them to create ordinances or misdemeanors and in those areas to fill those those gaps, I guess, where the NRS doesn't include that. And that might be something that is unique to that location or that locality. And that gives some flexibility. Like speeding is speeding across the state, but there may be some unique types of traffic I guess citations or laws that are unique to Clark County or that are not the same, and like Elko wouldn't require them. And so this gives them the flexibility. So they can already do that when it comes to criminal like charges. And so they can do that already with traffic when it was criminal. And they want to be able to say, hey, look, we realize that this is a gap in the NRS, but we don't think it should be a misdemeanor. It shouldn't be a criminal misdemeanor, but we want to have our own civil citation. So this allows the county to be able to do that, if that makes any sense.
Thank you for that. So the question, pause for response. Just want to make sure I'm asking it correctly. So if someone wants to contest a ticket, and I'm thinking in traditional terms of showing up to court to contest that ticket, how does legal counsel ask questions if the police officer can just submit a ticket? I'm taking this from the idea that the police officer isn't present in court and they can just, present a statement. Could you speak to that?
Well, that's the law. So this bill doesn't do anything to change what we passed in 116 in the 81st session. So just to make this clear, it doesn't change what we enacted in the previous session to do that. But I can answer that question because I think it puts a context in some of the problems that you may see if this bill proceeds to a work session. You'll see an amendment that has to do with this. So when you are charged with a crime, you have certain you have certain constitutional protections, including, you're innocent until proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And when it turned into, and you could also arrest, you could also give someone up to 6 months in jail for that speeding ticket, or broken taillight, or any one of those civil infractions. And so when we converted over to civil infractions for those minor traffic matters, now you can no longer be incarcerated for 6 months for that. You can no longer be arrested if you fail to pay your warrant or you fail to pay your ticket. And so what had happened in the past is people would go in and they would plead not guilty to the criminal charge of their traffic matter, and they would request a trial. And they would have a criminal trial that would be allowed, and they would be able to cross-examine. It would be up to the state or the city or the county or whoever was prosecuting that particular ticket to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed that charge. And they had those ability. Obviously, that was a drain on our resources. We were incarcerating people for traffic tickets, and we rightfully agreed that that policy was not correct. So then we moved into a civil-like infraction, and the standard is a lot less because the consequences are less severe. You're not going to jail if you're found guilty of speeding. You're not going to jail if you do any one of those kind of things. But we still wanted to make sure that there were due process protections. I think that's where we're running into some difficulty because some of the courts are treating this exactly like they would any other civil case. And I don't think that was our policy intention here as well. We don't want to fine and fee people to death, because they are challenging and they're requesting due process that is built into the statute. And so you see that right now where people go in and they want to resolve it. And if you go, I can tell you right now, if you go in with a ticket and you don't have an attorney and you just want to contest it and you say, hey, I want to contest this ticket, you have to put a bond down like you would if you were conducting a civil trial. And then you get your trial date where you could potentially subpoena on your own, someone to represent you and subpoena that officer if you weren't okay with just the affidavit. I guess that makes sense. I don't think that's really what we intended, so that's some of the language that we're looking at right now. In addition to that, there are also problems with people that want to resolve it and they don't know whether or not they're going to get a reduction in points, whether or not they're going to be ordered to do traffic safety school. And so they're being asked to essentially plead guilty to the civil citation without knowing what the outcome is. And that is a new process that we are hoping that we can clear up in statute what our intent was. And, I think people want to know what it is that they are doing if they want to resolve it. They want to know if they're getting traffic school. And I think some of those things like points, traffic school, and that kind of accountability is necessary for public safety, and that is not really being implemented in some of the jurisdictions around the state right now. So I anticipate those are some of those things. I know that doesn't really answer the ghost question, but I think it puts some context to some changes you might see coming forward if this was to make its way to a work session.
Thank you. What it did is it's reminded, I'm doing, of course, a state-by-state comparison in my head, and it's reminding me just how complicated some of these procedures are here. So thank you for that. Not seeing any additional questions, I will open it up for testimony. If there's anyone here in Carson City that would like to testify in support of Senate Bill 104? People are walking up so slow for this support testimony. Usually people are like eager to get up here and everyone's kind of like, here we go. So, support, please remember to say your name and spell it so we have it for the record.
Good morning. Lisa Mosley Sales, Nevada State Director for the Fines and Fees Justice Center. We rise in support of this bill. We worked very closely with then Assemblywoman Nguyen, now Senator Nguyen, on this bill, and we support the changes that we're working to clean up, particularly the bond for contesting a ticket. So thank you, Senator Nguyen. We'll be with you forever on this cleanup if you need us to be. So thank you, committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Pure from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We'd like to thank Senator Nguyen for continuing to work on this issue. Traffic tickets were something that kept people in a cycle of poverty. There were many people that could not afford to pay traffic tickets but were scared to go to jail, would eventually get a bench warrant, get arrested while driving, lose their car, lose their house, and take a long time to get back on their feet. AB 116 started to bring a stop to that. This bill is further refining the procedures, and we're more than willing to continue to work on this issue so that a traffic ticket isn't something that ruins somebody's life. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. Erica Roth, ERICAROTH, on behalf of the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. I want to thank the bill sponsor for bringing this forward and her continued work over the years on this issue. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Adam Cate on behalf of the Nevada District Attorneys Association. It's CATE. In support of this bill, in response to one of the questions, the Washoe County Code Chapter 70 actually has a long list of traffic infractions that mirrors the Nevada Revised Statutes. And there's actually some very specific language in the ordinances about areas in Washoe County, for instance, that parking is illegal. So there are local, sometimes, issues in the code that would benefit from a change, as we did for the state level, making it a civil infraction as opposed to a misdemeanor. So we are in support of the bill. Thank you. Chair Miller, Assembly Committee on Judiciary. My name is Chris Reese, RIES, representing the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. We support SB 104, and we want to thank Senator Nguyen for her allowing us to be part of these discussions. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. Jason Walker, JASONWALKER, Washoe County Sheriff's Office, testifying in support of Senate Bill 104. Happy to have participated in these working group sessions. This is a good start at cleanup for the often misunderstood traffic citation system.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. My name is John Abel, JOHNABEL, Director of Government Affairs for LVPPA. We support the cleanup language for the bill. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. Greg Herrera for the record, GREGHERRERA, today representing Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. We're also in support and like to thank Senator Nguyen for including us in these discussions. Thank you.
Is there anyone else here in Carson City that would like to testify in support of Senate Bill 104? Not seeing any. Is there anyone in Las Vegas? Not seeing anyone broadcasting. Will you open the lines, please?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then I will open it up for testimony in opposition of Senate Bill 104. You ran her off, so.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Tom Clark here on behalf of the Nevada Judges of Limited Jurisdiction. We were kidding because I really do hate being the only one to come up in opposition to a particular piece of legislation. The judges are concerned and continue to be opposed to the elements of the bill that won't allow them to revoke a driver's license. We have respectfully agreed to disagree with the sponsor of the bill on that particular provision. We do know that there are some other provisions of this bill that need some cleanup work, and we're looking forward to our Wednesday meeting to have her and the other stakeholders that have been up in support working on those key elements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in Carson City in opposition? Is there anyone in Las Vegas in opposition? Not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then I will open it up for testimony in neutral. Is there anyone here in Carson City that would like to testify in neutral? Not seeing anyone. Is there anyone in Las Vegas? Also not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, is there anyone on the line that would like to testify in neutral?
There are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Then with that, I will go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 104 because our presenter has left and there will be no final remarks on the bill. With that, our last order of business today is public comment. So people will have the opportunity to comment on anything that's under the purview of this committee that's not directly relating to these two bills that we heard. Is there anyone here in Carson City? Is there anyone in Las Vegas? Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please, for public comment?
The public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. Then with that, this concludes our business for the day. I will see everyone back at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. This meeting is adjourned.